No, I'm here.
No. Okay, you're here. I'm Alix, that's Kris.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. We didn't know where to sit.
Oh, here we
We
are.
got it now.
Actually, I like this. I can't see a thing.
Is that a
Could be
fog
like five,
machine? Is
could
there
be
a fog
five
machine?
people out there.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
I've never been on a stage with a fog
Yeah.
machine. Anyway, Kris, it's great to meet you.
Great to
I'm
meet you.
excited to do this.
Yeah.
So we wanted to start off a little macro because obviously a lot has happened today, particularly in the Middle East and with oil prices, et cetera. So I thought it would be good just to start with a broad perspective of what do you do when you have headlines of Iran sending missiles into Israel and the geopolitical risk is heightened every second?
Yeah. So I'm glad you didn't ask me what I think the oil price is going to be.
Oh, that's coming.
Yeah.
That's
so spoiler alert, I don't know. When you think about the macro, and obviously the news we woke up to this morning, no one likes to see that, and it creates a lot of instability, not just in the region, but globally. And we see markets respond to that, right? We saw oil respond to that this morning. But if I step back for a moment, we just talk about the macro for oil. And why are we talking about oil at an Energy Disruptors Conference? Is because that price of oil obviously dictates a lot of choices that are made, both within the oil and gas industry and outside of it. And if I think back, to oil price and macro, what we do know with certainty, I can tell you one thing with certainty: the oil price will change. And it's a very cyclical thing. And I remember 2012, 2013, 2014, I think there was people thinking oil was going to be $100 forever. And it didn't quite turn out that way. And I think we were starting to lull ourselves a little bit into, wow, looks like 75, 80 bucks is the number. But when you look at all the drivers around the macro, I think we've got certainly instability to the downside, but we also have some instability to the upside. So I'm a believer it is going to cycle. Could we have $50 oil again before we know it? It could happen. I think the fundamentals for oil are quite strong in the long term. And when I say strong, I don't mean $100 oil, but strong to incent the right investment to be made to ensure that the energy systems are supported globally.
Which is what?
I think you're in that $75, $80 type of range. I think obviously a big driver of oil price is OPEC and OPEC Plus and the decisions that they make in terms of managing their share of the global production. You get into that kind of price, that's sort of what people would call their social price, the price stability that they like to see. But you also see them discipline the market. And I think everyone's looking right now and wondering, are the Saudis about to discipline the market a little bit or not? Or quite frankly, are they looking to discipline
Iran
the other members of OPEC Plus right now?
That.
Yes.
I think is more the answer. But this is where I think it gets so interesting because you have a cyclical price and oil will be cyclical, et cetera. But as an oil company, an energy company, you have to make long-term decisions in a market that is weirdly structural shift. So yes, you have to invest in oil and gas and keep the wheels running, and you know how to do that because you know how to manage oil volatility. But then you also have to invest money in other stuff. That's going to be this energy transition. That's going to be a structural shift in our world, and we have no idea where we come out on the other side.
Right.
That sounds hard.
Well, it's not easy. But, I think, again, it's this balancing of short and long term. And in particular, all oil companies face this to some degree, right? The investments they're going to make, how they're going to allocate capital, how they're going to allocate capital to maintaining the production they have, how they're going to allocate to growing, how they're going to allocate to their shareholders, how they're going to allocate to decarbonization, how they're going to allocate to energy transition. And, for our company and our sector, so the Canadian oil sands in particular, it has another layer to it because the investments we make are very long term.
Yes.
Right? We're not U.S. shale players. We're not making short cycle investments, looking for short paybacks and just keep the cycle going. When we make investment decisions, they're with a very long term view, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And that's a difficult place to be. And so what you need to do, my view is, first of all, you have to cut through cyclicality, right? And you have to take a view on long-term fundamentals, but you can't bet on the high, and you shouldn't you should prepare yourself, but not bet on the low, right? And so the decisions you make have to go through the cycle, and they have to endure the test of time of the cycle. So as we're looking at capital allocation, think about my company. My company has 27 years of resource or reserve life. And we have more beyond that. That's what we've proved or probable at this moment in time. So we have decades and decades of resource. Now we're making decisions on what does 2040, 2050, 2060 look like when you're making those investment decisions. And so as we allocate capital, we need to allocate capital so that we're ensuring the right investment in that resource, which fundamentally believe is going to be there and be needed for a long time. But at the same time, and you know, the whole point of energy disruptors is energy systems being disrupted over time. And where do you allocate capital outside of that to make yourself more resilient to the future?
Well, also, at the same time, we don't know what that market actually will look like.
Yeah.
So, and we haven't been through that cycle before. So when we look at a band of oil, okay, let's just call it, 40 to 80, let's call it 60. Then you kind of moderate and figure out your view with that, right? And how you allocate capital in natural resources. But for like hydrogen, we have no idea. For like carbon capture, no clue.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the challenge right now. And I think one of the things, and it's not just our industry, I think a lot of industries are starting to face this right now. As we've set targets for the future, as we've set directions, we're finding that as the rubber's hitting the road, it's becoming more and more difficult to make those decisions because of the uncertainty that's still around you. Now, you do need to pick some lanes, and you need to start moving forward. But you
is the regulatory? Is the uncertainty regulatory or demand?
It's all of those. It's the regulatory environment. It's the political environment that's around it. It's the market that's going to support it. It's that demand, and so. No one knows at this moment how all of these things are coming together. So if you make big bets early, you can create a lot of risk. And so you've got to manage those bets, but if you make no bets, you won't win the game, right? And so what we need to do is we need to allocate capital. First and foremost, we're in the oil business, right? And we generate a lot of value, not only for our shareholders, but for Albertans, for Canadians, for our employees, for communities. And so first and foremost, we're going to allocate capital into the business that we're in. And we're going to make sure that we're very resilient and strong. And that's why as the Chief Financial Officer, I care about the balance sheet, right, as my CEO does, so that we're resilient, so that when the world does hit $50 oil, we can continue marching with our plans. We don't have to react in that world in a way that takes us off course. And once we've allocated capital to ensuring the strength of the business we're in and appropriately growing that business, and we're allocating capital to our shareholders who are putting their capital at risk, right, and providing them a return. We're also allocating capital to the future. And some of those are larger bets. So we can talk about carbon capture and sequestration, or we can talk about fuel switching as examples where we're expecting large capital. Other ones are going to be more moderated investments because we need some of the uncertainty cleared. So I think in the hydrogen economy, you need some of that uncertainty cleared as an example.
So you have, we were talking earlier, $6 billion in CapEx a year, roughly?
Roughly.
10% roughly into energy transition.
Yeah, I'd say 10%. It could be a bit more into decarbonization, transition type of investments.
What are those lanes that you're going to stick to?
Yeah, so the way we think about our company is first and foremost, we're sitting here with a large world-scale resource. The oil sands is the fourth largest resource globally. We're an integrated energy company, so we take that energy all the way from production in the oil sands all the way to the consumer and all along that value chain here in Canada in particular. There's some Petro-Canada stuff out there that people can see. And as we look at our investment in decarbonization and transition, we're looking where does it fit in with our competitive advantages, what we know, our know-how, and our strengths. And so that leads us ideally to investing first and foremost in decarbonizing the business we're in, right? And that's where you look at technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, fuel switching. So as an example, we're investing over $1.5 billion in a cogeneration plant that is going to replace the steam and power that's generated today by petroleum coke-fired boilers. So think about, it's like coal. It's like firing coal to create steam and create power. So instead, we'll have high-efficiency combined cycle natural gas cogeneration. It's going to take almost a megaton of direct emission out of our operation. So there's an example of fuel switching, as well as energy efficiency. Those are the main points to go, we're targeting for decarb.
And that's like a scope 1 sort of?
Scope 1, scope 2. And then we're looking at the value chain as well and energy transition. So first and foremost would be low carbon fuels. We're in the fuels business. We're the largest provider of liquid fuels here in the country. We're the largest blender of biofuels in the country. And so we're looking at how do we invest smartly in that system to decarbonize the fuel pool. And then I'd say hydrogen.
Would that be SAF, for example, sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, so a few examples. I mean, right now we produce ethanol. We've done that for many years. We operate the country's largest ethanol facility. But it's that next generation of biofuels. So an example would be SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel, where we have an investment in a technology called LanzaJet. We're partnered with Shell, Mitsui, British Airways is in that partnership, and we're just opening up the first commercial demonstration plant in the eastern US. A second example would be we're invested in a waste-to-fuels technology in eastern Canada, in Quebec, literally turning garbage into liquid fuel or energy. And again, we're partnered with other companies in that technology. Those ones I would describe as placing the small bets, right? Because we don't know how those technologies are going to work. We don't know the economics, but we're very interested in being part of the ecosystem. And then at the same time, we blend a lot of fuels, so we're always looking at renewable distillate. And you see that a lot in the US, right? Renewable distillate, if anything, I think has gone through the roof just in terms of the amount being produced in the US. I think eventually we should see more investment in Canada, but quite frankly, there's a lot of supply right now south of the border, and the economics and the regulatory system here make it difficult to invest in those things today. But that doesn't mean we're not going to be investing in them, down the road.
So in the US, the way it's kind of worked out with the IRA is that the IRA did a really good job at helping the supply of stuff through tax credits and things like that, like 45Q. What it didn't do a good job of is securing the demand side. So a company might be able to build a hydrogen facility and get some nice tax credits, and then they have no idea how to get that offtake agreement signed by the buyer, and that price is so hard to come by.
Right.
What are your biggest struggles in that? Is it still the supply problem? Is it the demand side when you're thinking about trying to ramp up some of these other projects?
Yeah, as I think about it, and we can talk about any of these, like carbon capture and sequestration as an example, that type of investment. The issue right now, while there's certainly, it depends on the technology that you're talking about, whether it's the market, the supply, or the demand, but in the middle of this is actually the regulatory fiscal framework to support that. And unfortunately, we're in a place right now where we need those frameworks to incent the investment. And you see it in the US. I'll tell you, a lot of Canadian companies point south of the border at IRA or 45Q.
And say, do that.
And say, do that, do more of that. We need more carrots, so to speak.
Yes.
In Canada, we have a regulatory framework right now that I would say is more complicated. Has been more stick-based than carrot-based, though it's not without carrots. There are some tax incentives now in the system. But when you look at our regulatory framework, with industrial carbon taxes, consumer carbon taxes, low carbon fuel standards, Canadian electricity regulations to decarbonize electricity, and in our sector in particular, emissions caps, you start putting those layers on, it becomes difficult to sort through that. And then you need the market to evolve, because to your point, we could build a blue hydrogen plant tomorrow, but the cost of that hydrogen is going to be more.
And who's paying for it?
So you need somebody that's willing to step up and make the commitment to pay for it.
So in my prep for this panel, I got to learn more about regulatory rules in Canada, which was great. And you schooled me on the C53, is it? Yeah, C59. 59.
Yeah.
Which from what I understand is a headache for every company, but in particular, oil and gas. Yeah. How do you manage that? How do you deal with government rules where they want to be your friend and your enemy at the same time?
Well, I think governments at the end of the day, they're trying to put policy in place that are going to incent the right behavior and
Sure, or get reelected.
I think at the end of the day, though, it's kind of back to my complexity point. And Bill C-59 was just another point of complexity that's put onto the system. I'm sure it's a topic du jour, probably in some other panels, but the long and the short of Bill C-59, for anybody in the audience who may not be up on it, is a piece of legislation came in 2 or 3 months ago with little or no consultation with industry, not just my industry, industry in general, that's fairly vague in its application. It's a couple of sentences that basically says if a Canadian business is going to make any representations, environmental or climate representations, must do so in accordance with internationally recognized methodologies, or be liable. And the onus is on a Canadian company to prove the negative, and anyone can bring a claim under that piece of legislation, and the penalties are quite onerous. And so, one thing business craves, and I'm sure you hear this a lot in your line of work, business craves certainty.
Yes,
right,
I do
to be
hear
able
this
to
a
make
lot.
decisions. This piece of legislation just created more uncertainty. Now, all that being said, that came out on whatever day it came out. The next day, we were still doing the same things we were doing the day before it came out, right? So our commitment to environmental performance, our commitment to climate action, our commitment to investing for the long term in these types of things, that's all still there. The activities that we were doing the day before, we're still doing the day after. What the issue is now is how do we talk about it? And I think we're all trying to figure that out, and this is all under the Competition Act as well, which is an interesting piece of legislation to put that in. I think it was aimed at really greenwashing and really consumer protection, but it's so broad in its application, I think it goes beyond perhaps the original intent of those who wrote those two lines. And so it's going to take us a while to work through. It's important, though, that we communicate. It's absolutely important that we communicate, not just our industry, that we all communicate about this, because we are trying to set goals, targets, aspirations, and we're trying to bring together one of the more complex things, I think, that, quite frankly, countries have tried to do. And if we're not able to have these conversations, and this to me is a piece of legislation, while it's intended a certain way, I think actually has the opposite effect, that it's actually green hushing in some respects, that it's not allowing the right dialogue to happen, the right aspirations, the right goals. Because quite frankly, no one can sit up on one of these stages and say, yeah, I've got it all 100% figured out, exactly what I'm going to do from here to 2050, to the T.
No,
Instead,
that would be amazing.
we have to make choices, right?
And also, things aren't going to work sometimes. And then you got to go back and admit failure and then figure it out again, right?
Fail fast and move on.
So
right?
that has to be there too. And I know that at least in the US, energy literacy is really low. There's not a real conversation on how you turn on your light bulb, like where that comes from.
It's the wall.
It's the wall. It's just the wall, whatever. And then where that comes from to then really make people aware of the choices that they need to make. So we still have a couple minutes left, but I thought it'd be really fun to talk about since it's energy disruptors, what the coolest thing is that you guys are working on that you're most excited about. Technology, energy thing, something?
Yeah, you know what? There's so much, so we've only got a couple minutes, but it's everything from how we use, I was listening to a panel on AI earlier. AI is one of the greatest opportunities of the industry. It's also one of the greatest risks if you don't get it right. But using digital technology, using automation, using AI, we're putting in place autonomous haul systems in our mines. Matter of fact, by the end of this year, we will have the largest autonomous haul fleet in a single mine in the world.
So is that like a dude somewhere like doing a joystick to like remotely operate the truck?
That is a 360-ton truck with no driver.
Okay.
That's being operated by a computer with air traffic control sitting in the center, essentially. Right? And not only does it increase productivity, but it improves safety, right? It improves the operation of the business, and it's one way that we're leveraging technology. But I'd even say there's cool technologies for the next generation of production in our business. And this goes actually to the decarbonization. There's technologies for in situ development that can reduce greenhouse gas intensity by over 80%. And I'm talking solvent technologies. There's conversations in our space right now around how we could maybe use small modular nuclear, down the road as well. That's an exciting conversation to have about the industry. And so there's all of these interesting technologies, this intersection of what I'll call hard technologies, kind of the physical technologies, married with the digital technologies. And I think all of us, all companies in our sector are right now trying to find the ways to marry those two things.
Because the digital stuff is not anything new. I mean, I remember talking about, autonomous rigs that get up and move themselves around like
Yeah.
20 years ago.
But it's the first time that it's been used in an oil sands application in our particular type of mine in temperatures that can go from 30 degrees plus Celsius in the summer to 50 degrees minus in the winter. And so actually it's an application of the technology that hasn't been done globally before.
That's really great.
Yeah.
It gets 50 degrees negative Celsius?
It does. You should come up and visit us.
I don't want to. Oh. That's terrible. What is that? What is that Fahrenheit? What is that in Fahrenheit?
Really, really
negative,
cold.
really cold. All right, Kris, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much,
guys.
Alix. Thank you.